Hello everyone, this is Yours Trivia, and today we're concluding our Hanzhong series with episode 4, titled The Aftermath. Now we ended our last episode as Zhao Yun and Huang Zhong managed to cut off Cao Cao's supply lines on the Han River as they raided and burned down Cao Cao's supply depot. This not only dampened the morale of Cao Cao's forces, but also put a timer on Cao Cao's time in Hanzhong, as they now only had 2 months worth of supplies remaining. Not wanting to admit defeat, Cao Cao kept up his blockade of Mount Dingjun, hoping that his forces at Yangping Gate would be able to eventually break Liu Bei's supply line as well. In the meantime, Liu Bei's forces stepped up their attack on Cao Cao's encirclement, as Liu Bei had his adopted son, Liu Feng, ride out and trash talk and challenge Cao Cao's camp every day. Knowing that he cannot risk launching an uphill assault against Mount Dingjun directly, especially when short on supplies, Cao Cao ordered his forces to stay put, as they chose to ignore Liu Feng's challenge. But unfortunately, they cannot ignore his words, as the trash talking outside their encampment continued. And eventually, it even got to Cao Cao, as he would order for his son Cao Zhang to be summoned to Chang'an immediately, as he wanted Liu Bei to know that his son would outdo Liu Bei's son. But the battle between Liu Feng and Cao Zhang would never happen, as by the time Cao Zhang reached Chang'an, Cao Cao's army had already begun running out of food. And with Liu Bei's supply line remaining intact, there was only one thing left for Cao Cao to do, that is, retreat and give up Hanzhong. So in May of 219, just 1 month after Cao Cao's army would arrive in Hanzhong, before the food supplies were completely exhausted, Cao Cao's army, along with the original Western forces stationed at Yangping Gate, started to flood out of Hanzhong through the Chencang and Baoxie path. However, at this time, Chencang's path had still 300,000 Liang province civilians trying to migrate back to the Central Plains, where the Baoxie path also had the 80,000 civilian migrants from the western Hanzhong region. And not only were these paths crowded, but Liu Bei's forces were also hot in pursuit. And it would take Xu Huang and almost all his forces' lives to buy enough time for Cao Cao to escape out of Hanzhong. And as we mentioned before, the logistical efforts of the Hanzhong campaign and the massive migration of these civilians have already pushed the Han Empire to the brink in terms of laborers being conscripted and their economic impact. And with Cao Cao's defeat at Hanzhong, followed by this hasty retreat where countless civilians would die on these crowded mountain passes, rebellions started to happen across the land. First, on the western Chencang path, a group of officers in Cao Cao's army, who were locals, along with some migrants who did not want to leave, launched a coup against Cao Zhen's army. Led by a future Shuhan general in Wang Ping, this force ditched Cao Zhen's forces and instead marched back into Hanzhong to join up with Liu Bei. Meanwhile, Liu Bei was busy seizing territory, as Liu Feng was immediately sent east to sail down the Han River to attack the city of Xi in the eastern part of Hanzhong. At the same time, Fa Zheng's friend Meng Da, who had previously left Liu Zhang together with Fa Zheng to summon Liu Bei into Shu, and had been stationed in the Jin province this whole time, also received news and started to march west from the Jin province to siege Shangyong, as control of Shangyong would link up Hanzhong with Guanyu in the Jin province. And in June of 219, with Liu Feng's forces coming from the west and Meng Da's forces coming from the east, Shen Dan, the administrator of Shangyong Commandery, was surrendered to Liu Bei. Now, not only was Cao Cao losing military battles left and right to Liu Bei's forces, rebellion suddenly became a major issue for Cao Cao, as the over-conscription of laborers would lead to massive backlashes from hard-hit provinces like the Jin province, where Cao Ren was ruling with a draconian touch. So from 218 to 219, civilians in the area surrounding Xuchang ended up killing local officials and rallying to join Guanyu, while even the prefect of the Jin province, Hu Xiu, and Nan Commandery's administrator Fu Fang and Van City's Hou Yin all rebelled against Cao Cao and joined Guanyu, which is what ultimately sparked Guanyu's northern push into Xiangyang to siege Cao Ren. Meanwhile, all Cao Cao could do is observe from Ye, as his forces required time to regroup and rest before launching any counteroffensives, and the only thing Cao Cao could do to help in the meantime was to gather up what little reserve forces he had remaining at the time and sent them to Xiangyang to help Cao Ren buy him more time. So in July of 219, Yu Jin was given command of 30,000 troops that were scrapped together from 7 different army groups and sent off to Xiangyang to help Cao Ren. Now, Yu Jin was not the first choice here, as Cao Cao had wanted his son, Cao Zhi, leading this reinforcement group. But on the night the assignment was given out, Cao Zhi was blackout drunk and ended up missing the assembly the next day. And ultimately, this irresponsible behavior displayed by Cao Zhi would doom him in his fight for air with his older brother Cao Pi. But we're not going to elaborate too much here in regards to this battle for air or on Guan Yu's attack in the Jin province, as they will both have their own dedicated Let's Talk lore series in the future. For the time being, we just need to be aware of the chaotic state of things facing Cao Cao following his defeat and retreat out of Hanzhong. Instead, for the remainder of this series, we'll focus on the victor of the Hanzhong campaign, Liu Bei, who will leverage his victory at Hanzhong to name himself the Prince of Hanzhong, or Hanzhong Wang in Chinese. And this was a particularly important and symbolic title, as the founder of the Han Dynasty, Liu Bang, was also given this title before launching his campaign to unite China and form the Han Dynasty over 400 years ago. And due to this importance, Liu Bei didn't simply name himself the Prince of Hanzhong. Instead, over 120 officials and generals from within his court signed a joint petition to the Han Imperial Court asking the emperor to name Liu Bei as the Prince of Hanzhong. And luckily, the content of this petition was not lost to time, and we can still study it to gain insight on the structure of Liu Bei's court. As of the 120 officials and generals that were mentioned, 11 were clearly named and ordered at the start of the document. And they were Pingxi Jiangjun, Du Tinghou, Chen Ma Chao, or the general who pacified the West, and the second Marquis of Du, Ma Chao. Zuo Jiangjun, Ling Zhangshi, Zhen Jun Jiangjun, Chen Xujing, advisor to the general of the left, and the general who stabilizes the army, Xu Jing. Ying Sima, Chen Pang Yi, lieutenant advisor, Pang Yi. Yi Cao Congshi, Zhonglang Junyi, Zhonglang Jiang, Chen She Yuan, the administrative assistant and the military advisor, She Yuan. Junshi Jiangjun, Chen Zhuge Liang, army advisor general, Zhuge Liang. Dangkou Jiangjun, Hanshou Tinghou, Chen Guan Yu, general who eliminates bandits and the second Marquis of Hanting, Guan Yu. Zhenglu Jiangjun, Xing Tinghou, Chen Zhang Fei, general who conquers marauders, and the second Marquis of Xin, Zhang Fei. Zhengxi Jiangjun, Chen Huang Zhong, general who conquers the west, Huang Zhong. Zhenyuan Jiangjun, Chen Lai Gong, general who defends the frontiers, Lai Gong. Yang Wu Jiangjun, Chen Fa Zheng, general who bolsters morale, Fa Zheng. Xingye Jiangjun, Chen Li Yan等, generals who brings glory, Li Yan, and etc. Now the ordering here is determined first by the highest rank given by the Han Imperial Court, which ends up being Ma Chao, who had received his titles from Cao Cao and the Imperial Court when his father Ma Teng had surrendered to the Imperial Court, and is listed first here as his general who pacifies the West is official Han title. Then Xu Jing, who is the advisor to the general of the left, is next on the list, because general of the left is the official title given to Liu Bei himself by Cao Cao when Liu Bei had first joined the Imperial Court after their combined campaign against Lu Bu. Therefore, Liu Bei's official advisor, Xu Jing, ends up being the second highest Han official amongst all of Liu Bei's court. Then Pang Yi and She Yuan were high-ranking officials from Liu Zhang's court that had Han titles originally. And then finally, starting with Zhuge Dan, all the titles start sounding very fancy, but they were all simply handed out by Liu Bei privately, and not official Han imperial court titles. So from the order of importance here, you can see Zhuge Dan is first, followed by Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, and Huang Zhong. Then Lai Gong was someone who had previously worked for Liu Biao, but eventually became the prefect of the Jiao province, and he is a quite renowned scholar, and will eventually become one of the grand tutors for Shu Han in the future. And then finally, Fa Zheng and Li Yan are two key turncoats from Liu Zhang's court, who were both entrusted with key military roles under Liu Bei. Now, notably missing from these 11 names are more familiar names like Zhao Yun and Wei Yan, and the reason for this is quite simple, because both of them never got recognized by the Han court. Zhao Yun and Wei Yan both got their start as personal bodyguards to Liu Bei. And although both will get general titles eventually, their titles are not official ones in the eyes of the Han court, therefore their name would merely belong in the etc. portion of the signers of this petition. And of course, much like the warding of names, this petition is merely a symbolic gesture to the Han court and the emperor, as it was under Cao Cao's control. Therefore, the Han court would never approve Liu Bei officially as the Prince of Hanzhong. But this was an important step to officially declare to the world that Liu Bei is now the Prince of Hanzhong, and all of China was next. And with this, we will conclude our episode and bring an end to our series. And next week, we will take a temporary break from our chronological history of Three Kingdoms to talk about something else, as there will be a 3-part series covering the history of Chinese naming conventions, where we will focus on the different elements of a Chinese name, going from surnames, clan names, style names, nicknames, and temple names. And we'll use plenty of examples from the Three Kingdom period, as I want to take a pause before kicking off Guan Yu's last dance, which would chronologically follow the Hanzhong campaign, but since it would officially kick off the formation of the Three Kingdoms, and we still have a bit of Sun Quan's lore that's missing, we're going to change the pace up with the What's in a Name series before revisiting a bit of Sun Quan's upbringing and covering his first 2 failed Hefei campaigns, as we would need to provide a bit of background on him, as he will become the 3rd emperor here, before we jump into Guan Yu series. So hopefully you all enjoy this series here, and I will see you all next time. Bye!